Long ago, before maps had borders and before flags had colors, there lay a stretch of red clay and green hills, cursed by memory, but rich with silence. This land did not speak, but if it had, it would have screamed. They called it Akanwua, the land where drums no longer beat, where the air was heavy with chains, and the soil drank the sweat of the forgotten. Here, enslaved men and women were forced to dig trenches by moonlight, harvest cocoa by sunlight, and bury their names by firelight. But even in silence, the land remembered. It remembered every heel driven into its body, every whip that cracked across a back, every song swallowed before it was sung. The people of Akanwua were once proud hunters, herbalists, and weavers. But when the great boats arrived from across the sea, bearing muskets and silver trinkets, they traded more than just goods. They traded destinies. The colonizers did not ask. They demanded. They did not build. They took. And Akanwua fell. Its shrines burned, its tongues beaten out, and its daughters stolen into midnight. One of those daughters, only remembered as Obianuju, was made to live, not as a woman, but as a tool. She was not given permission to rest. She was not allowed to name her child. She was forced to give birth in a yam barn, while her master slept soundly above. The child she bore? No name, no father, only pain. And yet, this nameless child learned to walk. He learned to smile, even if his teeth were chipped from chewing roots. He learned to carry wood on his back and silence in his chest. And when he had children, he told them nothing of freedom. Because in Akanwua, freedom was a myth, like a river flowing uphill. But myths sometimes become memories, and memories become seeds. For generations, the children of Akanwua lived under the illusion that suffering was inherited like skin. That land was only for the conquerors. That bloodlines tainted by chains could never taste sweetness. But the earth has its way of remembering, and the skies do not forget prayers whispered beneath them. A century passed, then another. Obianuju's great-granddaughter would be born in the city, not in chains, but in cement. She would never hear the name Akanwua from her parents. She would grow up among buses, books, and broken dreams. But in her blood, the drums were still beating. And one day, by paperwork, not protest, by signature, not scream, she would return. Not as a slave, not as a beggar, but as the owner. The land would finally answer her name. But that is not today's story. That is a story yet to come. For now, we close this chapter with a whisper from the earth. I remember you. The city was loud. It echoed with the cries of ambition, the clang of frustration, and the hum of buses rushing nowhere. It was not a place for remembering. It was a place for surviving. There, in the heart of concrete and chaos, a girl was born to a woman who had long forgotten where her grandmother came from. The name Obianuju was never mentioned. Not in bedtime stories, not in family prayers, not even in whispers. She was not named after any ancestor. She was not tied to any village. Her parents gave her a name borrowed from a singer they once heard on the radio. It meant nothing, because they believed their past meant nothing. But blood remembers what tongues forget. From the age of 5, the girl would often wake in the night, sweat pouring, heart racing, the name Akanwua on her lips. Her parents thought it was a dream, a phase, a nonsense word. But the dreams continued. She saw chains buried in the dirt. She saw trees marked with names. She saw a woman kneeling by a river, crying into cupped hands. She saw land. She saw herself standing upon it. In school, while other children played, she drew hills. Always the same hills. Lush, green, silent. While others wrote essays about their favorite foods, she wrote poems about land that bled and trees that wept. Teachers were puzzled. Her mother scolded her. But deep within, something ancient stirred. Something that would not let her forget what she had never been told. At 19, she found a rusted metal box beneath her grandmother's bed after her funeral. Inside, a faded photograph of a barefoot woman staring into the forest. A yellowed map with the word Akanwua scratched in faded ink. And a letter, unreadable, burnt at the edges, but still smelling of smoke and soil. That night, the girl did not sleep, because in her soul, something clicked. Not like a memory, not like a vision, like a door. And through that door she walked. She began to search. She visited the city's archives, libraries, abandoned buildings, any place that smelled of age. The name Akanwua showed up only once, in a colonial ledger, under a list marked territories claimed and cleared. Cleared, as if people were debris, as if homes were weeds, as if memory could be uprooted. But she kept digging, and slowly fragments emerged. She pieced together family names erased from ledgers. She found the name Obinuju beside a note. Transported, reassigned, no return. She found court records of land taken for settler farming. She found receipts of cocoa exports, measured in pounds, but paid in blood. Each page was a wound, but instead of running from the pain, she gathered it, like seeds. And one day, standing in front of a government office building, with files in one hand and her grandmother's photograph in the other, she filed a petition. Not for charity, not for reparation, but for proof. Proof that her ancestors existed, that their labor was not invisible, that the land they once wept into still remembered them. She expected silence. But weeks later, there was a letter. Her name was listed as a descendant. And the land? It was unclaimed, unowned, forgotten by the world, but not by her. She bought it for less than the cost of a city apartment. Just like that, the land of chains now wore her name. But the land was not yet hers in spirit. It waited. It watched. Because land does not bend for papers. It bends for truth. And she was only just beginning to learn its language. The first time she stepped on the soil, it did not welcome her. It did not sing. It did not weep. It watched. Dry winds kissed her face like questions. The trees stood still, taller than memory, older than any map she had read. Grass grew wild where houses once stood. Roots curled like fingers reaching for forgotten bones. The land was no longer wounded, but it had not yet healed. She walked alone through the forgotten fields, guided only by the pull in her chest, like a compass written in blood. There were no signs, no markers, no plaques of history, only silence and breath, and the sense that someone had been waiting. The land of Akanwua had waited for a century, waited for a name to return, waited for a daughter to come, not to take, but to remember. She stood beneath the great tree, the one she had drawn 1,000 times as a girl. Its bark was cracked, its limbs broken by time, but in the hollow of its trunk, she found carvings, names gouged deep into the wood, some half erased by weather, some glowing with morning dew. One name she recognized, Obinuju, and beside it, the symbol for daughter returned. She had never seen that symbol before, but her bones knew what it meant. This was not just soil. This was testimony. She set up a tent, not to conquer, but to listen. Each night, she sat beneath the moon and read the names she had collected. The names of the enslaved, of the silenced, of those whose breath had fed the roots of this land. She brought no offerings, only presence, and the land noticed. The wind began to carry voices, not loud, not clear, but warm, like songs hummed without words. She woke up once in the middle of the night to the smell of yam porridge in the air. But there was no fire, no pot, only memory drifting through the trees. Another night, the earth beneath her tent shifted slightly, as if something below had turned at its rest. She walked to the edge of the stream where Obinuju once cried, though she had never been shown its location. There, she placed her hand in the water, and the current wrapped around her wrist like a child clinging to a mother. The land had begun to speak, but not with words. It spoke through rhythm, through vibration, through the return of breath. She met an old man from the nearby village who said, "This land is not open for just anyone. You carry their bones in your spine. That's why it listens." And so she stayed, not as a visitor, not as a settler, but as one who came home. She rebuilt nothing. She replaced nothing. She simply tended to what remained. She cleared weeds from unmarked graves. She collected seeds from native trees and replanted them. She documented every stone, every mark, every forgotten artifact. Not for fame, not for money, but for truth. Because she had learned that truth is the only bridge between pain and peace. And the land, once broken, now hummed with her footsteps. It knew her name. The name it had buried had bloomed again, but there was one more thing left to do. One last gate to unlock. One final return. Time passed slowly in Akanwua, but this time it was not from pain. It was from peace. The woman who once came to reclaim land had now been reclaimed by it. Her tent became a cottage. Her days, quiet rituals. Every morning began with water poured at the base of the great tree. Not for religion, but for remembrance. She began to build, not structures, but archives. Digital files, audio recordings, scan maps, oral histories collected from elders who still spoke of those who were taken. She opened no schools. She hosted no press conferences. She only kept the gate open for others like her, those whose blood held stories too long silenced by distance. One day, a woman arrived from the Caribbean, another from the southern United States, one from Brazil, all strangers, all sisters. Each had traced their roots, not through documentation, but through dreams, family songs, and gut-deep ache. And when their feet touched the red soil of Akanwua, they too cried, because the land had not only waited for one, it had waited for many. She never imagined the power of a name, until hers appeared beside Obianuju's in a local land registry. Two names, separated by centuries, united by soil. She was no longer the girl with no name. She was now keeper, witness, daughter of the returned. The deed said she owned 11.2 acres, but in truth, she held something deeper. The ability to remember what was meant to be forgotten. The courage to honor what was once desecrated. The grace to share what was stolen, not with bitterness, but with sacred intention. Tourists never came. There were no monuments. And yet, Akanwua became something larger than a village. It became a mirror, a place where descendants could see who they were before the world renamed them, before history folded them into statistics, before chains replaced their birthrights. One day, a child from a nearby village asked her, "Is it true your people were slaves?" She smiled softly and whispered, "They were more than that. They were roots, and roots don't die. They wait." And that child returned every week to help her clear bush, plant seeds, and record names into a growing book. Not a book of tragedy, a book of return, of reclamation, of restoration, because what had once been a place of chains now echoed with laughter, stories, and songs. The trees stood taller, the river ran clearer, and when the wind blew through the valley, it no longer moaned. It sang, and in that song was her name, not just on the deed, but on the wind, forever.